say any English words. Tim was still, for the most part, unmoving on the ground. His finger twitched, almost at me, almost beckoning. I headed right for the bathroom closet again, stepping over all the mess, and picked up the sled with the cartoonishly large first aid kit on top of it. I was going to leave when I noticed some rope in one of the dark corners, along with an extra pair of ski slopes. I grabbed the rope, sled, and the first aid kit, and left back to the main room. Tim was heavy, and not knowing the extent of his injuries, I tried to be as cautious as possible when hefting him onto the wooden toboggan. I secured both Tim and the first aid kit onto the toboggan, leaving a little extra rope to pull the sled with. The weight's in my pocket. I got my skis on and headed to the window one last time. It had been ominously quiet. A blue sun stared back from behind the curtain. Grendel's eyes gave off a strong enough light that I winced against it. The window exploded as he forced his massive hand through it, splintering the wood frame and causing the wall to heave. I ran back to Tim and the sled, screaming, heaving towards the door. The rope cut off the circulation to my fingers as I pulled with all my strength. A groaning lock from the roof crashed onto the spot where Tim lay a second ago, and the roof soon caved in with it. Outside the lodge with Tim in tow, I could see Grendel squatting, his hand shoved through a wrecking ball-sized hole in the side of the small building. Immediately, he saw me and rose to his full staggering height. The lift wasn't running, and I pushed past it, almost at the beginning of the slope now. Dragging the toboggan slowed me down considerably, and one of Grendel's steps halved the distance between us. When I pushed off the edge of the slope and started down the mountain.
And who are you, and how did you get into my pocket dimension? I'm a interdimensional traveler, but I don't know how to control my dimensional abilities, where I can teleport or collide. Okay. Let's see what's wrong with you. 3, 2, 1, action. Set you down. Let's put that there, and there we go. Now you should be able to travel to other dimensions and, without, going randomly. You know what I mean? Thanks. You're welcome. Press play, I guess.
The final rule for mountain number 1 pushed to the front of my brain. I quickly scanned the trail ahead of me and the surrounding forest for signs of the impending hunt. Our speed was increasing rapidly, and the sled began to inch ahead of me. A crashing from behind us indicated that Grendel was still in pursuit, on all fours and pawing down the mountain after us, like a gigantic lion hunting zebra. With Tim now pulling me down the mountain and no way to steer, I held onto the rope and breathed. Skiers started pouring out of the forest in a human tsunami, spilling out onto the trail and converging behind me as a horde. I bet it looked pretty funny, like in the old-timey slapstick movies. A three-way chase down the side of a mountain. Tim and I in the lead with our extra speed from the toboggan, followed by what looked like 100 skiers, and bringing up the rear, a giant. All we needed was some silly music. A handful of the skiers were too slow, and wordlessly ground to meaty pulp by Grendel as he dragged himself down the slope with his fists. We were about halfway down the mountain. In front of me, the rope still held Tim and the first aid kit tied to the toboggan. Tim's goggles and mask covered his face, and I wondered if his eyes were open. I didn't notice at first because I was going so fast, but the trees bordering the trail had new attributes. What seemed like long white tubes, as thick as the trunks themselves, hung from and intertwined amongst the branches.
So, what's your name, by the way?
Blurs at first. I focused my eyes and caught glints of lights shining from milky scales.
Mia. Yeah.
Broad heads as large as television swayed from side to side. Watching from above. Almost every tree had an elephantine serpent
16
adorning its
turning
branches.
17 next year.
They made no
My
move to
name
join the chase,
is
but
Adam.
almost seemed to resemble guards,
Fair enough.
ensuring that the prey stayed within the boundaries of the hunt. Distracted by these new beasts, I didn't see Russ,
What's your
or
last
whatever
name?
the thing was that used to be Russ, emerge from the woods further down the slope and position himself directly onto the immovable path that the sled was taking. Traveling at a deadly speed, we smashed into Russ and sent
Do
him
you
flying
know
up and over us.
anyone named
The toboggan drifted sharply to the left and suddenly
Talia?
flipped, forcing me to ski into and crash along with it.
Yeah.
A hollow
Yeah.
sound registered when the ground
She's my
met me.
mum. So that
By the time I
means
stopped rolling,
I'm one of your
I was
daughters.
3/4 of the way down the mountain.
Okay.
Tim and the first aid kit had come loose from the sled. The
Fair
first
enough.
aid kit had sprung open in the crash and lay motionless alongside Tim. Up the mountain, the hunt looks to have been paused. All of
Born,
the
I guess.
skiers had turned and currently occupied Grendel's attention. To his feet. His arm and shin were broken, but he still wobbled over with abrupt movements and showed no signs of pain. His deflated limbs bounced and swung like pool noodles beneath their twisted joints. Shit. I tried to scramble backwards, then my skin like a tumor. I tried to punch it back into its socket, but each strike elicited an agonizing whimper. There was no time. Russ was on top of me and holding my neck firmly in his grasp. Just as I reached into my pocket and curled my finger around the smooth metal trigger, I felt the world's most highly pressurized balloon pop under my coat. My first thought was, I can't believe I just shot myself. The sudden stabbing pain in my ribs was convincing, but must have been from recoil, because Ruff stiffened and rolled off of me onto the snow. Pulling the revolver from my pocket, I planted the barrel on top of Russ's temple. Barely enough time for him to squeal. The hammer of the gun snapped, and the barrel exploded. Being too close to the gun, I wasn't able to hear for a few seconds, but I could see Russ's head look like someone had stepped onto a plate of jello. The liquid that poured out of him looked pink and far more viscous than any blood I've seen. It took a moment for the ringing in my ears to subside and eventually be replaced by another sound. An engine. At the bottom of the slope, a snow-faded pickup truck emerged into view and parked next to the lift. I dropped my head in relief and barked a laugh. Who knew a shitty Ford could look so good? The passenger door popped open, and a figure covered in a huge winter jacket and
We
snow pants
just
hurried
killed your
out,
friend, so
unfastening a snowmobile strapped on the bed of the car.
you are gonna kill yourself.
By the time the driver door opened, the person had mounted the snowmobile and begun to gun it towards the mountain. Wait! A voice I faintly recognized. Kip. He hobbled out of the driver door of the pickup truck and reached an arm out, as if to grab the rider on the snowmobile. Don't go up there! Luckily, we were close to the bottom, and the snowmobile made quick work of the steep incline. I checked behind me as it drew closer. Grendel had finished with the army of skiers. A plateau of bodies covered a decent section of the trail. In a roar from Grendel focused my eyes back towards the king. His irises shone, and from this far away, slightly obscured by the snowy winds, it looked like there were twin lighthouses standing in the distance. I felt the snow vibrate as Grendel began to head down the mountain and towards us once again. Hurry! I shouted, and turned to see Tim being hefted onto the back of the snowmobile. Can you move? The rider, a man, called to me. Terrified, I nodded and tried to stand, but my knee shrieked in protest, and I fell back onto my ass. It felt like someone had punched it, and I realized that my kneecap had slid back into place. This by no means meant that I could walk.
Before departing from their native local universes for the super universe.
This by no means meant that I could walk, and my knee began to swell to the size of a golf club. No, I need help, I begged. The man made sure Tim wouldn't fall and drove the snowmobile over to me. He stopped as he got off, and I recognized the look on his face when he saw Grendel heaving down the mountain. Time for us to go. He extended a hand for me to grab. What I didn't know at the time was that the man in front of me was Kip's son. His name was Corey. Every time I'm forced to retell this story, I make a point to explain how Corey was a hero. Though, usually by then, anyone listening has mentally checked out, silently labeling me as either an attention seeker or a freak. I don't care much anymore. Corey had convinced his dad to come out and save us. Reminded him why he started working on the mountain in the first place. Like most heroes, Corey didn't die a good death. With everything going on, it was impossible to notice the great white serpent burrowing through the snow at us. It struck Corey with its massive mouth, nearly swallowing his entire arm. He gasped and made a terrible noise while in the blink of an eye, the snake pulled him to the ground and coiled its muscular body around him. Corey was a big guy, and yet the snake had barely used a third of its body to securely wrap the entirety of his length. For a moment, my eyes met the giant reptiles, and I felt as though it told me something in a wordless alien tongue. Do not interfere with the hunt. As fast as the snake had come, Corey was dragged away, choking and screaming in the forest by the slithering monster. Corey! Kip, still at the bottom of the slope, fell to his knees and let out an anguished cry I couldn't hear over the sound of thunderous steps behind me. I felt it though, in my bones, and Kip's despair washed over me. For the second time on this mountain, I felt ready to, no, wanted to die. I rolled onto my back and saw the thing that changed my mind. Grendel looked down at me from above the trees. He had no expression but the malice that radiated from his titanic mass, which consumed everything. I would have rather died 100 times to my own hands than resign myself to whatever fate the king had for me. Grendel's arm began to get larger, and I realized that he was reaching to grab me. I was somewhat able to move now, but my knees still slowed me down far too much. In my pocket, a weight nudged my bruised ribs. The revolver. Freeing it from my jacket, I aimed the gun at my target, so large it was impossible to miss. And yet, every time I squeezed the trigger, I flinched more than Grendel did. Unfazed, he closed his hand around me. My sanity was a pane of glass, thrown from a cliff and about to smash into pieces on a rocky shore. I was a few seconds away from worshipping the thing if it meant mercy. Instead, I reached once again into my jacket pocket and found the flare gun. I was still gaining altitude in Grendel's hand and at chest level to the king. I fired. Fuck you, you motherfucker! The sound was similar to a Roman candle firework. A weak red glow glowed from my hands and into the scarred chest of Grendel, settling snugly into one of the deep crevices. Within a few seconds, the glow sputtered, dimmed, and then suddenly ignited. The white bristly hair surrounding the flare eagerly caught flame like straw, and soon Grendel's entire chest was an orange sea of fire. Probably for the first time in his long life, Grendel was in a panic. In the mayhem, I was sent flying through the cold air, suddenly released from his grip. A large amount of powdery snow cushioned my fall, and from a safe distance, I watched Grendel, beating his chest like a drum.
If you want, you can
Grendel
stay
swatted
here.
the spreading fire to no avail. He gathered
please.
ridiculous quantities of snow into his hands and threw them onto his torso. But by then, the fire had spread to his arms, back,
The
and
next
legs.
day, since you're going
The last howl he made was something you can only witness once in your lifetime.
But what
I
I'm
felt the
saying
wind change
is,
directions when out of his mouth
if
came
you
the
need
raging fear
help,
of a king.
this place will be
And
a
with that,
safe area.
He turned and fled up the mountain.
Thank you. Yeah.
Now a mobile blaze traveling through the sky. It was minutes before the air was silent again. The wind whistled around the trees, and the sound of my quick breaths were accompanied by small clouds of vapor. Still, I watched Grendel. From this distance, he just looked like a giant ball of smoke, rapidly ascending the mountains. It traveled from the first mountain to the third, and eventually disappeared at the peak of mountain number 3. Philip, are you alive? Kip was calling from the bottom of the slope, still on his knees. I tested my leg for a response and found it tolerable. Half crawling and half scooting, I made my way towards Tim and the snowmobile and clambered on. The ride down felt far too long, and at the bottom, I let myself slide off the snowmobile and fall asleep in the freshly fallen snow. My bus ride just finished. I don't have time to drop anything off, so I'll just Uber to the hospital. I used to go visit Tim at the hospital a lot. So did Russ's family, as they were unable to recover Russ's body. Eventually, they stopped speaking to us altogether. Tim had shattered a good amount of his spine, and he had trauma insured that even if he did wake up, he wouldn't be my brother. Right now, he looks the same way he did on the mountain. Maybe that's why I couldn't stomach it any longer. Maybe it reminds me of how useless I was, unable to save my own little brother. Who would go and see that movie? I'm the only one in the room with him right now. My mom and the doctors left to give me some space. And so, for the last few precious moments with my brother, instead of talking to him, I'm recording this. I can't bear to face him. My time with Tim is up. My mom came in and rested her hands on my shoulder. And then, the doctors, like drones moving wordlessly around the room, avoiding eye contact. Are you ready? One of them asked. My mom nodded. Tim ended up breathing on his own for an hour. Only my asshole brother could be that stubborn. We stayed with him the whole time. And towards the end, I held his hand. During his last few gasps, when he began to struggle for air, he squeezed my hand. I leaned forward and told him, "You were always the better skier." Kip stayed in touch with me. We were bound, connected now by tragedy and loss. He told me stories about Corey, and I shared my own about Tim. He said that Corey was in the room when Kip was on the radio with me. He really kicked me in the ass, called me a coward for even thinking of abandoning you. And I'm sorry that those were my intentions. I told him not to worry. I probably would have done the same. Over the months, we talked quite a bit, and he cleared some things up for me. Supposedly, Artie, the man torn apart by the skiers, was who Russ's father contacted about the mountain. Soon after we left, Russ's father asked Artie to check on us, even paying extra for him to do so. Grabbing his friend, Jerry, who Kip mentioned was Artie's +1 whenever he went on his drug-fueled benders, they ascended the mountain. The incident didn't make the news. I asked more about the Kings and the history of the mountains. And
Don't
it would
be
be a while before
curious.
Kip began to invite me over periodically to explain.
What could happen?
Everything he told me would be too much to say here. And frankly, I don't want to right now. I need time to grieve. Here's a rough summary of what I learned from our conversations. In some texts from the southwestern indigenous tribes of the US, Grendel's sleep cycle is recorded as 80 to 100 years of hibernation, followed by only a single year of lucidness. The periods that he was awake for were labeled the Dread Years. He is the last of a long-forgotten race of titans that once ruled the earth. Mountain Number 1 belonged to Sisi,
My
the
ass.
Serpent King.
They're not
His
tough,
hunters,
they're
the
weak.
skiers, supposedly have the king's blood running through their
But
veins.
humans, they're even weaker.
From what Kip knows,
They're not
he
worth my
says
time.
that more than anything,
Humans.
the skiers were entertainment for Sisi, while he left the jobs of protection and enforcement to his king's guard. The serpent that took Cory was one of them. There isn't much known about them. According to the lone survivor from the Arapaho caravan, Sisi emerged from the forest on their descent from the mountain and headed north after his attack. Mountain Number 2 is a labyrinth, residence of Draka. There is talk of treasure at the end of a dizzying maze of paths, if you can find a way past the trees and the voices. So far, no one has lasted more than a few minutes past the time dictated by the rules. Except on that one day, a young boy found a way through. Kip refused to explain further. I explained to him what I've been doing, recording about what happened and how it's helped in a way. Kind of therapeutic. He scolded me at first, argued about how it might encourage people to go looking for the place. Recently, I've been talking to him more, and he seems to be opening up to the idea. Said he might want to write about what happened on the day the resort closed. I don't want to pressure him or anything, but I told him that it's a good idea. And if this story isn't deterrent enough, to everyone listening to this, do not go looking for those mountains. You can decide whether to believe me
I'm not born.
or not. But for the sake of my brother,
Let's watch another video. I'm not born.
my father was a brilliant man and a dangerous one. He engineered a small town underground for us to live in because he believed that the world above was gone. That is where I was born, and where I lived my entire life. Up until last week, when, in desperation, my mother helped push open the hatch and hoist me outside, into the sunlight. My father was wrong about the world ending 40 years ago. But if the thing that devoured him ever makes it above ground, the world may still yet end. I was the first history teacher to have been born below. So in the beginning, it felt very strange to tell the children about the history of humanity back when it existed above. But my mother pointed out that when she had learned it above, her teachers had never seen most of the things that they related either. That's why we learn history, she'd said, so that we can remember what we never knew. You will do wonderfully, Akeya. On the day the walls began to rumble, I was teaching the history of how we came to live below. Seth Whalen was an accomplished engineer working for the United States government on a military project. I began. He was quite aware of how destructive the weapon that he was designing was, because after all, he was its chief inventor. Yet at the time, he was naive and believed the man who told him that the weapon would only be used as a safeguard, a last resort to prevent a doomsday scenario. By the time he came across some documents indicating otherwise, it was too late. His design was in their hands, and there was nothing that he could do about it. I paused as I felt the first tremor. I didn't think anything of it, as tremors were a common occurrence. Still, there had been some bad shifts in the past, with more projected in the future, so we had to take the early warning sign seriously. "Was that a shift, Miss Whalen?" asked one of my students, Aiden. "No, Aiden," I said. "It was merely a tremor, and it seems to have passed. Now, I will continue with the lesson. As I was saying, Mr. Whalen discovered that there were indeed plans to use the weapon aggressively as soon as it was completed. My father, that is, Mr. Whalen, estimated that he had 2 years to do something about it. That was how long he calculated that he could stall the project." Kara, my daughter, raised her hand. "Yes, Kara? What was the weapon to be used for?" I hesitated. This was always the hardest part. To reveal to the children that humanity had killed itself off, and the world along with it. Recall the tensions between the US and the Soviets that I've been teaching you about. The so-called Cold War. With the ever-present lurking threat of nuclear engagement, the weapon was many times more powerful than any existing nuclear weapon, and was meant to turn the Cold War into the hottest war imaginable. That was what was later to happen. Mr. Whalen tried to point out the obvious, that by the time the weapon actually gathered enough energy to fire, the Soviets would have had enough time to send off their entire nuclear arsenal. It meant the end of the world. But nobody listened to him. Another tremor hit, this time more intense. The walls shook so hard that the clock fell down and shattered on the floor. "Perhaps we should continue the lesson another time," I said. "Class is dismissed.
So,
You are all to make your ways directly
you
home
smoke weed, don't you?
and listen to your guardian's instructions."
Of course. Cool.
"But we were just getting to
Well,
the part where
you're
Grandpa
born to
built the
smoke. Keep cup on
Said
now.
Kara.
Keep this one up a spare.
We'll pick up there tomorrow,"
Thank you. You're welcome.
I said. "Now, everyone is to go straight home. Kara, you come with me." This
Can
happened
you
on
get
occasion,
me
and
pregnant?
was nothing to be much alarmed about yet.
Stuffing door.
I waited to make sure that each child was heading in the right direction. The school was situated in the exact center of the 3rd floor,
Well,
to symbolize the
what now?
importance that knowledge and wisdom had in our lives. Our houses encircled the school, comprising the remainder of the 3rd floor. The 2 floors above where we lived were taken up with agriculture. The floor below was for administrative work, and the floor below that was for manufacturing. When the children were all walking down the proper paths out of the school courtyard, I began walking to my own home with my daughter. As we were passing by the bench near Sapiendam Lake, where I had my first kiss as a teenager, the ground jolted violently, and Kara was thrown off her feet. I hurried to help her up. "It's a shift, isn't it, Mama?" she asked, rubbing her knee and sniffling a bit. "It may well be," I said. "We'd better hurry inside." We rushed back to our house and went inside. My father was in his usual place, in the meditation room, sitting in his chair, hooked up to his machines. "Ah, my dears," he said when he saw us through the doorway. "School has been cancelled to discuss." "Why can't I hear?" whined Kara. "Childhood comes but once," said my father, struggling to find his breath. He put his mask over his face and inhaled deeply. Then he went on. "Though the world is gone, we remain human, and are swayed by the dark passions and knowledge of unclean things. Bathe a while more in the warm, delightful waters of youth, my Kara. Splash in joy, and leave the doors closed for as long as you are able. That may be a while yet, I hope. Relish in the mystery and the wonder at what's on the other side." Kara sighed. "Fine, I'll go with Grandma," she huffed. When I was alone with my father, I approached him and put my hand on his arm. "What is it?" I asked. "Shh," he said. "Do you feel that?" I was about to reply that I didn't feel anything unusual when from outside we heard a monstrous crash. The sky is falling, said my father. It's a shift? I asked. It's more than a shift, I'm afraid. It's rebirth. Outside, a steadily mounting rumble was growing louder. Father, I said, what are you talking about? My father sighed deeply and was silent for a while. I heard the beeping of his machines as the noise outside threatened to drown them out. At last he spoke. I haven't been truthful with you, my love, nor with anyone. I waited for him to explain himself. Oh, he said, I'm quite sure that the world above has been blasted to hell. That much is the truth, that they were ready to destroy the world as the natural conclusion of their hatred. But the weapon, I dismantled it before I came below and brought the key component with me. The house itself began to shake, despite its foundation running endlessly deep into the earth. Father, I said, we should shut up in the steel room until this passes. He lifted his hand as far as the tubes attached to his arm would allow and waved dismissively. The steel room won't protect you. Nothing will. You're scaring me, I said. Indeed, I felt like a small child again, experiencing her first shift. I thought of Kara and how scared she must be. What is going on? The weapon, my father said. I tell people that it was a supercharged nuclear device of sorts. But that's not what it was at all. It didn't destroy things by blasting them with radiation. It erased things entirely from existence.
But
I
that's
tried
not
to
about
grasp what he was saying as books began to topple off of the shelves. That it doesn't make sense. Nor does it make sense that we've been living underground for the past 40 years. Oh, I've told a million lies that are convincing enough, as long as you don't stop to think about them or do a modicum of research. And I know it's different for you, since you were born here, and it's all you've ever known. But the air we breathe, the food we grow, and the electricity we enjoy, it's quite implausible that thousands of us could enjoy these things so far underground.
After this, I
without some
will
help.
see you in a year.
I heard glass shatter somewhere in the house, and my mother came running into the room with Kara in her arms. Kara was crying inconsolably. Seth! My mother shouted. What is this?
Felix, as good as it looks, is impossible to resist. You look high and low. To get his paws on tender, meaty pieces in a succulent jelly that he absolutely loves. Positively irresistible to clever cats.
Are we saying that when we push that button, we destroy the world?
Oppenheimer. Seth! My mother shouted. What is this? I was just explaining, dear, said my father. I suppose you all might as well hear it at this point. It's already over, I'm afraid. I can feel it carrying my mind away to the nothing. My soul, too. Whatever soul there is. What are you talking about? I screamed. 42 years ago, he said. I was testing a new mechanism at the lab late at night when I felt another presence there. I didn't see anyone or anything, so I tried to shake the feeling, but it wouldn't shake. It kept intensifying, as if the thing were getting closer. But there was nothing there. I figured that I needed some sleep, so I put my head down on my desk and took a nap. As I was sleeping, I felt it slip into me. I felt it all over my body, like ice, and then in my head, like endless darkness. Grandpa's scaring me, wailed Kara. I could barely hear, as the roar all around us had grown so intense. In fact, I wondered how it was possible that I could hear my father over the noise. Until I realized that he wasn't speaking out loud at all. I was hearing him in my mind. "We know so little of what there is," said my father, "and so little of what is not. It's like turning on a light switch or watching a magic trick. Just because it's gone doesn't mean it isn't there. And just because it's there doesn't mean it isn't gone. It's as simple as snapping your fingers once you understand it. But we're not capable of understanding it. Not without help." My father was bleeding from the nose and struggling to keep his eyes open. But he went on. "You see, I was the weapon that was to erase half the world. It would have been so easy, I realized. I merely needed to focus on it for a few days. And just like that,
Ready?
gone.
Yeah.
No trace of it,
Cool.
on the land or in the minds of men. It wanted me to go forth and wipe out existence. And I was prepared to do so. Arrangements were made, and I was strapped to an enormous machine of my own design.
What is it? Well, I will see you in a year, I guess.